Charleston, South Carolina, a city where Spanish moss drapes from the oaks like lace, and Sunday mornings still carry the sound of hymns floating from white-steepled churches. It's the kind of southern town that believes it has seen everything: births, baptisms, weddings, funerals. But nothing could prepare its people for the horror that unfolded in Side Room 406 of the Magnolia Suites Hotel. It was just after 8 a.m. when a housekeeper named Maya Thompson knocked on the honeymoon suite door. No answer. She tried again. Silence. Finally, she slid her master key into the lock. The door swung open on a scene so wrong, so jarring against the gentle morning light, that her scream carried down the hallway like a siren. Inside, the room looked frozen in the middle of celebration and chaos. Rose petals scattered across the floor, mixed with something darker, a spreading pool of red. The bride, Rachel Bennett, still wore the ivory wedding gown she had danced in just hours earlier. Now the lace was soaked in blood. Her body lay near the foot of the bed, head turned at an unnatural angle, a cracked bedside lamp lying beside her like a fallen weapon. Within minutes, Charleston PD sealed off the hallway. Detectives and crime scene techs moved quietly through the space, their latex gloves whispering as they collected evidence. The champagne on the table was untouched. 2 glasses sat side by side, one with lipstick, the other still half full. The air smelled of roses, alcohol, and copper. Downstairs, curious guests gathered behind velvet ropes, whispering rumors that would soon explode across every screen in South Carolina. The pastor killed his bride. It happened on their honeymoon night. The preacher's gone missing. Only 24 hours earlier, Rachel had been radiant, a 29-year-old elementary school teacher known for her kindness, patience, and unwavering faith. She'd married Reverend Malcolm Pierce, 35, the charismatic head of Faith Harbor Church. To anyone in town, their love story was a miracle. The devoted teacher and the man of God who had spent his life preaching purity. The church had been packed wall to wall for their vows. People cried when they kissed at the altar. Now, that same congregation was waking up to breaking news that their beloved pastor was no longer a man of faith. He was the prime suspect in a homicide. Detective Laura Monroe arrived at the hotel around 8:20. She'd worked murders before, drug cases, domestic disputes, but this was different. A preacher's bride, dead less than a day after saying, "I do." The symbolism of it made the air feel heavier. Monroe took one long look at the crime scene. The blood splatter near the bedpost, the dented lamp, the torn veil. On the nightstand sat a phone, screen still glowing with a draft message typed but never sent. He lied to me. This marriage was a trap. That sentence would haunt Monroe for months. By mid-morning, the press had already swarmed the hotel entrance. Cameras flashed as investigators carried out evidence bags. Reporters shouted questions nobody could yet answer. Where is the husband? Was it a robbery? A domestic dispute? Police traced the hotel's security footage. At 3:14 a.m., a grainy clip showed Reverend Pierce leaving through the east stairwell, dressed in dark clothes, carrying a duffel bag. He didn't look back. He walked quickly toward the parking lot, got into a navy blue Hyundai sedan, and drove off into the darkness. The image froze on the monitor, a preacher disappearing into the night just hours after his bride's death. By noon, a warrant was issued for Reverend Malcolm Pierce on suspicion of murder. At the Bennett family home across town, Rachel's parents collapsed when they got the call. Her mother, Patricia, had just been putting away leftover wedding cake. Her father, Harold, stared at the framed photo from the ceremony. Rachel in her veil, Malcolm's arm around her, and whispered she trusted him. Outside the Faith Harbor Church, parishioners gathered in disbelief. Some prayed, some cried, some refused to believe a word of it. The same pulpit that had echoed with sermons about truth and virtue was now tied to deceit and blood. As evening fell over Charleston, candlelight flickered in the church windows. Detectives were already piecing together the first clues of what would become one of South Carolina's most disturbing murder cases, a tragedy born not from hate or greed, but from shame, secrecy, and the unbearable weight of a lie. And as the bells of Faith Harbor chimed that night, the question on everyone's lips wasn't why did he do it, It was what could possibly make a man of God kill the woman who believed in him the most. Before he was the man behind the pulpit, before the headlines and the mugshot, Reverend Malcolm Pierce was just a quiet boy from Augusta, Georgia, the youngest of 4 sons in a family that worshipped both God and appearances. His father, Elder Nathaniel Pierce, was a deacon known for his booming voice and stricter-than-scripture discipline. His mother, Evelyn, led the church choir, demanding perfection from her boys just as she demanded harmony from her sopranos. Sundays were sacred in their household. There were no cartoons, no sleeping in, only starch-white shirts, polished shoes, and the heavy cadence of the King James Bible. From the outside, it looked like the perfect Southern Christian home. But inside, the air was thick with expectation, especially for Malcolm. Where his brothers were athletic and confident, he was small, introspective, and painfully shy. While they played football in the yard, he preferred to sit on the porch with his notebook, sketching or writing verses he was too afraid to read aloud. He was the one who didn't quite fit, the one other boys teased for being soft. And then came the incident that would shape the rest of his life. He was 13, away at a summer church camp. One afternoon, a group of older boys, kids who'd always mocked his gentle voice and quiet ways, decided to pull a prank. They stole his towel while he was showering, leaving him exposed as they laughed and pointed. It should have been just cruel teenage teasing, but it turned darker. What they saw, and what they spread through the camp, became the gossip that never died. Malcolm wasn't just awkward, he was abnormal. The rumors followed him home. By the time school resumed that fall, whispers trailed him everywhere. He avoided locker rooms, avoided eye contact, and when his father heard the gossip, he didn't offer comfort. He offered scripture. God tests every man differently, son, he said, without looking up from his Bible. Your strength is in silence. So Malcolm learned to hide. He built his faith not from devotion, but from fear. The church became his refuge and his disguise. Every verse about purity felt like armor. Every sermon about abstinence was a shield. If he could just be the holiest man in the room, no one would ever question what made him feel the most unholy. By his early 20s, he'd become a prodigy in the church circuit. That soft-spoken boy now transformed into a charismatic young preacher with a gift for words. He could make a congregation cry, then shout amen in the same breath. He spoke of redemption, self-control, and the power of living above temptation. People saw conviction. What they didn't see was terror. Behind every sermon about the dangers of lust was a man preaching to himself. His mother beamed from the choir loft. His father finally called him a real man. But when the services ended and the lights dimmed, Malcolm sat alone in his office, staring at his hands, wondering if holiness could really erase humiliation. He avoided dating completely. When parishioners tried to set him up, he smiled and said, "I'm married to the Word." They thought it was charming. They didn't know it was literal, because intimacy terrified him. Then came Faith Harbor Church. By 30, he was leading one of Charleston's fastest-growing congregations. Televised sermons, radio segments, 1,000 people hanging on his every word. He'd become a celebrity pastor, the kind who quoted Proverbs and smiled through pain. His reputation was spotless. No scandals, no women, just Malcolm Pierce, the man who preached purity in an impure world. But even holiness has a breaking point. Each time he counseled a young couple about waiting until marriage, he felt the lie tightening around his throat. Each time he told men to be proud of their strength, he thought of the locker room laughter that still echoed in his head. He prayed every night for God to fix him. When the prayers went unanswered, he convinced himself that faith could replace the flesh, that if he lived perfectly, he would be healed. But the body doesn't bend to belief. So he hid deeper. He stopped going to doctors, avoided relationships, and devoted every waking hour to the pulpit. His secret became scripture. His shame became sermon. By the time he met Rachel Bennett, he'd perfected the role, the calm, disciplined pastor who seemed incapable of sin. To her, he was the kind of man you pray for. To him, she was the one thing that might expose him. And yet, he couldn't resist her kindness. The warmth in her smile broke through the layers of fear he'd worn since boyhood. For the first time in years, He thought maybe love could save him. That if he found a woman pure enough, faithful enough, she could accept the truth, or maybe never need to know it at all. But that was the lie, because love built on secrets doesn't heal, it festers. And as Malcolm Pierce stood at the pulpit preaching about living in truth, he was already walking toward the night that would prove just how far a man will go to keep a lie alive. Before she became a headline, Rachel Bennett was simply Miss Bennett, the kind of teacher every child loved and every parent trusted. She taught second grade at Harborview Elementary, a sun-washed brick school where her classroom smelled of crayons, coffee, and hope. On Fridays, she let her students sing gospel songs before the bell. On Mondays, she slipped quiet notes into the backpacks of kids who looked sad. To anyone in Charleston who knew her, Rachel was goodness made real. Faith, kindness, and patience wrapped in one woman. But beneath her calm was a loneliness she rarely spoke of. Years earlier, she'd been engaged to a man who cheated on her with a coworker. That betrayal cracked something inside her. She forgave him because her faith told her to, but she never quite healed. After that, she stopped dating for a while. Instead, she filled her evenings with volunteer work, reading to children at the library, serving meals at the shelter, teaching Sunday school crafts at Faith Harbor Church. It was there, in the echo of choir rehearsals one rainy Wednesday night, that she met Reverend Malcolm Pierce. He noticed her first. She came in late, hair damp from the storm, clutching a worn leather Bible and a bag of teaching papers. Her smile, he would later say, felt like sunlight after confession. When he offered her a towel from the church supply closet, she laughed and said, "Guess I needed baptism twice today." From that moment, their paths intertwined. Malcolm invited her to join the young adults' Bible study. Rachel agreed, though she was older than most in the group. Over the next months, their conversations deepened, always respectful, always framed in Scripture. When he texted, it wasn't "good morning, beautiful," but Proverbs 3 verse 5, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart." Rachel's friends tease her about how old-fashioned it all felt, but she called it refreshing. After years of heartbreak, a man finally seemed to love her for her soul. He never pushed for intimacy, never made her feel objectified. He said, "The flesh can wait, the spirit can't." To Rachel, that sounded holy. To Malcolm, it was survival. Their courtship became the talk of the congregation, a storybook romance in a sinful world. Church elders called them an example for the youth. Rachel's parents were thrilled. Her mother, Patricia, once told a neighbor, "Every mother dreams her daughter will marry a preacher." But even fairy tales have shadows. Privately, Rachel's best friend Mariah Lewis worried. She'd known Rachel since college and could read her silences. During one brunch, she asked, "Don't you think it's odd, Ratch? He's 35 and says he's never been with anyone." Rachel smiled, stirring her tea. "Maybe God's been saving him for me." Still, there were moments that unsettled her. The way Malcolm would flinch when she touched his hand, how he changed the subject if she mentioned their future honeymoon, or how his eyes clouded with panic during premarital counseling when intimacy came up. She wrote about it once in her private journal. Is it possible to love someone completely and still feel a locked door between you? He says patience is faith. I'm trying to believe that. Yet, her heart outweighed her doubts. When Malcolm proposed after Sunday service, kneeling beneath the church cross as the choir hummed, "Amazing Grace," she cried and said yes. The congregation erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Children clapped. To them, it was a match made in heaven. The preacher who preached purity and the teacher who lived it. In the months that followed, Rachel planned the wedding down to every ribbon. Lavender and ivory, her favorite colors. Her students made handmade cards for the couple, some spelling Mrs. Pierce wrong in crayon. She saved every one of them. But even amid the joy, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about Malcolm didn't quite fit. He'd vanish into his office for hours after sermons. When she tried to ask about his childhood, he'd smile and say, "Some things are better left in God's hands." She thought it meant humility. In truth, it meant fear. The week before the wedding, Rachel met Mariah for coffee one last time. Mariah hugged her and whispered, Just promise me you'll listen to your gut if it ever feels off." Rachel nodded, but her eyes were dreamy. "He's a good man," she said softly. "I can feel it in my soul." No one could know that her faith, the very thing that made her who she was, would be the same faith that led her into the arms of the man who would destroy her. Because Rachel Bennett believed, and believing sometimes can be fatal. The morning of the wedding dawned bright over Charleston, sunlight spilling through the moss-covered oaks, the air thick with jasmine and anticipation. At Faith Harbor Church, white ribbons fluttered in the warm breeze while guests filled the pews, whispering that it felt like the holy event of the season. And at the center of it all stood Reverend Malcolm Pierce, dressed in a tailored gray suit, a small Bible tucked into his breast pocket. He looked calm, almost too calm, the picture of a composed man of God. But beneath that polished exterior, his heart hammered like a war drum. Every step, every smile, every handshake was rehearsed. He'd been performing for so long that he could no longer tell where the mask ended and the man began. He told himself that today was victory, that purity had triumphed, that the whispers from the past were finally buried. But deep down, he knew he was walking a tightrope between salvation and exposure. When the first notes of the organ began to play, the congregation rose to their feet. The double doors at the back of the church opened, and Rachel Bennett stepped in, radiant in her ivory gown, veil cascading like silk water behind her. Her father held her arm tightly, proud and teary-eyed. For one fleeting second, Malcolm's fear melted away. She looked like grace itself. He convinced himself this was God's plan, that love could fix what shame had broken. As she walked down the aisle, Rachel locked eyes with him and smiled. The kind of smile that could heal a man's soul if he let it. But instead of peace, Malcolm felt dread creep up his spine. Because she wasn't smiling at a stranger. She was smiling at who she thought he was. When she reached the altar, the pastor officiating the ceremony, an old mentor of Malcolm's, spoke of faith, patience, and truth. "Marriage," he said, "is built on honesty before God." The words pierced Malcolm like a blade. He swallowed hard, fingers twitching against the Bible in his pocket. Rachel's hand rested lightly on his, and he forced a smile. They recited their vows, hers steady and full of warmth, his trembling beneath a practiced rhythm. When the minister asked, "Do you take this woman in sickness and in health, in truth and in spirit?" Malcolm's throat tightened. The word truth echoed like thunder in his skull. But he said it anyway. "I do." The sanctuary erupted in applause as the couple sealed their vows with a kiss. Chaste, quick, almost mechanical. Choir members wept. Parents beamed. To the crowd, it was divine perfection. To Malcolm, it was the sealing of a lie. At the reception hall, laughter filled the air. Children danced between tables, and gospel music played beneath chandeliers. Rachel looked like she was floating, glowing from love, gratitude, and champagne. She told her bridesmaids, "He's my answered prayer." But the groom, her answered prayer, stood at the corner of the room, barely eating, barely breathing. He smiled on cue, posed for photos, hugged guests, and avoided her touch. Each time Rachel's hand brushed his arm, his body flinched as if burned. His best man, Deacon Lewis Carter, leaned over during dinner and whispered, "You all right, Reverend? You look pale." Malcolm forced a chuckle. "Just nerves, brother." But Lewis would later tell police that Malcolm's eyes that night looked like a man watching his own funeral. As the night wore on, Rachel danced with her father to Luther Vandross's Always and Forever. Guests wiped tears, couples swayed, and flashbulbs captured what would become haunting images in newspapers. The bride radiant, the groom's smile never quite reaching his eyes. Around 10:30 p.m., Rachel tossed her bouquet into the air. Laughter, applause, cheers. The music swelled, and she whispered to her cousin, "I can't wait for our honeymoon. It feels like heaven's just beginning." But heaven, that night, was already cracking. Outside, under the glow of street lamps, the newlyweds slipped into a white sedan. The hotel bellhop waved as they drove off toward the Magnolia Suites Hotel, where the staff had prepared room 406 with champagne, rose petals, and a handwritten note that read, Congratulations to the blessed couple. In the car, Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder. Are you happy? She asked softly. Malcolm's eyes stayed on the road. Of course, he said, but his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. She took it as exhaustion, maybe nerves. She kissed his cheek and said, Tonight's the start of everything. He didn't answer, because he knew, for him, tonight would be the end. As the sedan disappeared into the soft Charleston night, the church lights faded behind them, and the bells of Faith Harbor struck midnight. By sunrise, those same bells would toll again, not for celebration, but for tragedy. The Magnolia Suites Hotel was the kind of place couples booked to begin their forever. Room 406, with its soft lighting, rose petals, and champagne on ice, had seen hundreds of honeymoon nights. But on that humid Charleston evening, it would become a tomb where love met its ugliest truth. When Rachel Bennett and Reverend Malcolm Pierce entered the room, everything looked perfect. The bellhop had dimmed the lights and turned on the jazz station. Congratulations, Reverend, he said with a grin, handing over the keycard. Malcolm's smile was tight. The moment the door shut behind them, the silence felt heavier than it should have. Rachel sighed, slipping off her heels. Finally, she said softly, letting out a small laugh. Just us. She turned toward him with genuine tenderness, the same trust that had carried her through every vow, every prayer, every dream of their future. But Malcolm stood near the door, rigid. His shoulders were tense, his hands trembling. He couldn't meet her eyes. You okay? She asked gently. He nodded quickly. Just overwhelmed, I guess. It's been a long day. Rachel stepped closer, her voice warm and patient. It's just me, Malcolm. You don't have to be the preacher tonight. You can just be my husband. That word, husband, struck him like a hammer. He'd imagined this moment for months, dreading and denying it all at once. The secret he'd buried for decades pressed against his chest, clawing its way out. She reached for his hand, and he froze. Hey, she whispered, we don't have to rush anything. She smiled softly. I love you. But love, for Malcolm, had always been a battlefield between the truth and the lie he'd built to survive. He took a deep breath and tried to step forward to play the role one last time. But when her fingers brushed against him, the illusion cracked. Rachel's smile faltered. She tilted her head, confused by the fear in his eyes. Malcolm, she said quietly, what's wrong? He hesitated, eyes glassy. Promise me something, he said. Promise me you won't walk away, that you'll understand. Rachel frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. Understand what? He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Instead, he stepped back and began undressing, his movements mechanical, desperate, like a man walking into his own execution. When his shirt hit the floor and the truth came into view, Rachel's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't judgment that flashed across her face. It was shock, confusion, a single moment of realization so heavy it split the air between them. She covered her mouth. Oh my God. Malcolm turned away, humiliated. Now you know. The silence stretched, unbearable. Then Rachel whispered, You lied to me. Her voice trembled. You let me believe. I didn't mean to, he cut in, his voice cracking. You don't understand. People laughed at me my whole life. I thought if I stayed pure, if I lived right, maybe God would fix it. Fix it, she repeated, tears forming. You married me under false pretenses, Malcolm. You preached to me, to everyone about honesty, and this whole marriage is built on a lie. He stepped toward her, hands shaking. Rachel, please. I love you. It doesn't have to matter. She backed away, reaching for her suitcase. It does matter. You had years to tell me the truth. Don't leave, he whispered. You can't. I'm going to the front desk, she said, voice firm now. We'll talk in the morning. When she tried to move past him, Malcolm blocked the door. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temples. You promised before God, he said, his voice rising. You said you'd never walk away. Her tears turned to anger. Don't you dare use God right now. This isn't faith, Malcolm. This is manipulation. That word, manipulation, broke something inside him. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. Don't do this. Let me go. She screamed, yanking free. "You can't trap me with your lies." And then it happened. The split second between panic and violence that would end everything. Malcolm swung his arm, catching her across the face. The blow knocked her sideways into the bedpost. The crack echoed through the room like thunder. Rachel gasped, stumbling to her knees. "Malcolm, please." But the storm inside him had already taken over. "I can't let you tell anyone," he shouted, striking her again. The lamp toppled. Glass shattered. The jazz music still played, mocking the chaos with soft saxophone. Rachel tried to crawl toward the door, but another hit sent her collapsing to the carpet. When it was over, the room went silent, except for the sound of Malcolm's ragged breathing. He stood there, shaking, staring down at the woman who had loved him enough to believe. Her veil was torn, her skin pale against the dark stain beneath her. The roses on the bed had turned crimson where the blood had touched them. He dropped to his knees, whispering her name. "Rachel, please wake up, please." But there was no response, only stillness. In that moment, the preacher vanished. What remained was a terrified man staring at the ruin of everything he'd ever pretended to be. He wiped his face with trembling hands, whispering over and over, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." Then he looked around the room, the overturned lamp, the blood, the Bible on the dresser. And slowly, like someone possessed, he began to clean. By 3:14 a.m., Reverend Malcolm Pierce slipped out of room 406 with a duffel bag, a black hoodie, and a face pale as a ghost. The honeymoon suite was silent again. Only the faint hum of jazz and the whisper of a single text message still glowing on the screen of Rachel's phone, never sent. He lied to me. This marriage was a trap. When Reverend Malcolm Pierce slipped out of the Magnolia Suites at 3:14 a.m., Charleston was asleep under a blanket of mist. Street lamps burned low, the cobblestones slick with humidity. In the hotel lobby, the night clerk barely looked up as a man in a hoodie and jeans hurried past, clutching a duffel bag. To the cameras, it looked ordinary, just another traveler leaving before dawn. But room 406 told another story. Blood on the carpet, a torn veil, and a wedding dress that would never be worn again. By sunrise, the police had to call. The 911 dispatcher's voice cracked when the hotel manager said, "The bride's dead. Her husband's gone." Within hours, Charleston PD sealed the floor. Detective Laura Monroe stood in the doorway of 406, taking in the wreckage. A champagne bottle overturned, a lamp shattered, the sheet marked with crimson handprints. She'd seen violence before, but this felt personal, intimate. "He didn't just kill her," she murmured to a colleague. "He tried to erase what he did." Downstairs, reporters had already caught the scent. By mid-morning, the Post and Courier ran a breaking banner. Charleston pastor missing after bride found dead in honeymoon suite. The community that had once praised Reverend Pierce for his moral sermons now turned on their televisions in disbelief. Parishioners left voicemails at the precinct. "It can't be true. Please find him. God help us." Meanwhile, Malcolm was 2 counties away, driving south on a rural highway with shaking hands. The world outside the windshield blurred as the first rays of dawn hit his face. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. His suit jacket lay on the passenger seat, smeared faintly with blood. Every few miles, he whispered a prayer. "Lord, deliver me from evil." But deep down, he knew the evil was already inside him. He stopped at a gas station outside Walterboro, bought a map, an energy drink, and a cheap disposable razor. The clerk remembered him, sweating, trembling, eyes wild. "You okay, preacher?" she asked jokingly when she noticed the collar peeking from his hoodie. He forced a smile. "Long night," he said, voice hoarse. He paid in cash and left before she could answer. Detectives traced his movements through surveillance footage and credit card pings. At 4:03 a.m., he'd fueled up at that same station. At 4:42, his car passed a license plate reader on Route 17, heading northwest. After that, he vanished. He'd turned off his phone, ditched digital trails, and gone aground. For the next 6 days, the man once known as God's voice in Charleston became a ghost. He slept in his car behind abandoned churches, washed in gas station restrooms, and shave his beard in a truck stop bathroom mirror. He tossed his wedding ring into a drainage ditch somewhere outside Columbia. Each night, the same nightmare replayed. The crack of the lamp, the look on Rachel's face, the sound of her whisper turning to silence. Back in Charleston, Detective Monroe worked with the Georgia State Bureau and the FBI. "He's running scared," she told reporters. But a man like that doesn't run forever. Shame always drives them back toward the light or the grave. By day 4, the case had a name: the honeymoon homicide. National outlets descended. News vans lined the street outside Faith Harbor Church. Former parishioners described Malcolm as the purest man we ever knew. Others, more quietly, admitted he was secretive, too perfect, like he was hiding something. Rachel's funeral drew hundreds. Her students placed drawings of angels at the altar, their handwriting shaky but full of love. Her parents stood in silence, the father's hand gripping a folded note police had returned to him, his daughter's unsent text: "He lied to me." That same evening, in a rundown motel outside Orangefield, South Carolina, the clerk flipped channels on a flickering TV. The preacher's face filled the screen, wanted for murder, considered armed and dangerous. The clerk froze. He recognized the man instantly. He was in room 12. Police moved in quietly at dawn. No sirens, no shouting. They found him sitting on the edge of the bed, Bible open on his lap, eyes red and hollow. He didn't run. He didn't speak. When Detective Monroe entered, he simply looked up and whispered, "I knew you'd come." He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't resist as they cuffed him. In the patrol car, he kept repeating one line under his breath. She was going to tell everyone. Back in Charleston, Monroe reviewed the footage one last time. Malcolm leaving the hotel, Rachel's phone screen still glowing with a half-typed message. The evidence told a story as old as sin itself: pride, fear, shame, and the lie that faith could hide them. As the patrol car carried Reverend Malcolm Pierce back toward Charleston, Detective Monroe stared out the window and said softly to her partner, "He spent his whole life running from the truth. He just didn't realize the truth would be waiting at the end of every road." And for the first time since that terrible morning, the bells of Faith Harbor Church rang again. This time, not for love or worship, but for reckoning. Charleston's winter came early that year, gray clouds hanging low over the courthouse as the city prepared for a trial that had already divided it. Outside the Charleston County Judicial Center, cameras crowded the steps. Reporters whispered the same headline into their microphones: "The preacher who preached purity, now on trial for murder." Inside, the air felt heavy, thick with grief and disbelief. Reverend Malcolm Pierce sat at the defense table in a plain suit, thinner now, his once confident posture replaced by quiet defeat. His hands were clasped as if in prayer, his eyes red from sleepless nights. Behind him, a dozen former church members bowed their heads, still unable to reconcile the man who baptized their children with the man accused of killing his wife. At the opposite table sat Assistant District Attorney Marcus Hayes, flanked by Detective Laura Monroe and the prosecution team. Hayes had built a career on exposing hypocrisy, but even he admitted this case felt personal. "It's not just about murder," he told reporters before opening statements. "It's about trust, faith, and the danger of building your life on a lie." When court came to order, Judge Eleanor Whitman presided, a firm, fair woman known for her composure. She looked down at the defendant. "Mr. Pierce," she said softly, "you stand accused of second-degree murder. How do you plead?" Malcolm's voice was barely audible. "Not guilty, Your Honor." A ripple ran through the courtroom. Rachel's parents, Harold and Patricia Bennett, sat in the front row clutching each other's hands. Behind them, teachers from Harbor View Elementary and half of Charleston's press corps filled every seat. The prosecution's case. ADA Hayes rose, his tone measured but cutting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pacing slowly before the jury. "This case isn't about lust or jealousy. It's about shame, a shame so deep it turned a preacher into a killer." He painted the picture clearly: a wedding built on deceit, a honeymoon that turned to horror, a husband who killed to silence the truth. He pointed to the photos projected on the courtroom screen, Rachel's wedding gown, the shattered lamp, the message on her phone that read, "He lied to me." Then came the witnesses. The hotel housekeeper, Maya Thompson, described discovering the body. She looked like she'd been praying when she fell. The forensic pathologist detailed the injuries, multiple blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with the lamp base. Detective Monroe testified about the blood spatter, the duffel bag, the flight, and the arrest. Finally, Mariah Lewis, Rachel's best friend, took the stand. Tears streaked her face as she described Rachel's doubts before the wedding. She told me he was distant, that he'd never even kissed her properly. But she said faith would fix it. Mariah's voice broke. Faith didn't fix it. It killed her. The courtroom went silent. Even Malcolm bowed his head. The defense's plea. When it was their turn, the defense painted Malcolm not as a monster, but as a man trapped by lifelong humiliation. His attorney argued that he suffered from body dysmorphic disorder and religious trauma, that years of repression and ridicule had left him emotionally fractured. This was not murder, the lawyer said. This was a psychological collapse, a tragedy, not evil. A psychiatrist testified that Malcolm had grown up under extreme moral pressure and carried crippling shame about his body. He constructed religion as armor, she said. When that armor cracked, so did he. The defense played excerpts from Malcolm's sermons, calm, eloquent speeches about sin and forgiveness. "You see a manipulator," the lawyer said to the jury, but he saw a man begging to be loved despite his brokenness. In closing, the defense asked for mercy. If we condemn every soul who breaks under shame, none of us would stand. The turning point. Then came the cross-examination. ADA Hayes stood, holding a copy of Rachel's journal, found among her belongings. He read one line aloud, his voice steady but heavy. "He tells me purity is holy, but I think he means hiding." Hayes turned to Malcolm. "Reverend Pierce, you preach truth for a living. Yet the one person who trusted you most died trying to find it. Tell us, what part of that is holy?" Malcolm stared down at the table, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. He didn't answer. When the prosecution rested, the courtroom felt drained. Even the spectators seemed to hold their breath. Verdict. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. Judge Whitman's gaze was solemn as the foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Malcolm Pierce, guilty of second-degree murder." A wail rose from the Bennett family. Patricia clutched a handkerchief soaked with tears. Harold stared straight ahead, whispering, "Justice, baby. You got your justice." Malcolm closed his eyes. His lips moved soundlessly in prayer, but whatever words he spoke were drowned by the murmurs of the crowd. Judge Whitman delivered the sentence. Life imprisonment without parole. "Shame does not excuse violence," she said firmly. "May God have mercy where the law cannot." As the guards led Malcolm away, he turned once toward the Bennetts. For a moment, the mask fell away completely. He looked not like a preacher, but like a man staring into eternity. Outside, rain began to fall, a cold, relentless drizzle washing over the courthouse steps. Reporters called it the cleansing rain, but for Charleston, it didn't cleanse anything. Faith Harbor Church shuttered its doors a week later. Its steeple bell was removed, leaving only a hollow frame. Parishioners stopped coming, ashamed to be associated with a man they'd once called a messenger of God. For Rachel's parents, the verdict wasn't closure, only survival. "We can forgive," her father said at the press conference, "but we will never forget." And somewhere in a prison cell upstate, Reverend Malcolm Pierce knelt on the concrete floor, whispering the same prayer he'd preached for years. "Lord, deliver me from myself." But for the first time, heaven stayed silent. The first year of Reverend Malcolm Pierce's life behind bars was marked by silence. Not defiance, just silence. At Willow Creek State Prison, inmates gave him a nickname almost immediately, the Ghost Reverend. He spoke little, ate sparingly, and spent most of his days in the chapel, not preaching, but staring at the altar like a man waiting for an answer that would never come. Even in prison, the story followed him. Guards whispered about it on night shifts. New inmates recognized his face from the news. Some mocked him, others pitied him. One cellmate later told a reporter he'd wake up in the middle of the night, crying, whispering her name. Rachel. Always Rachel. His Bible was his only companion, worn and frayed from restless hands. He kept a folded wedding photo inside its pages, the same photo that once hung in his office at Faith Harbor Church. In it, Rachel smiled in her ivory gown while he stood beside her, eyes haunted even then. When asked why he still carried it, he said quietly, "Because I need to remember the day before I became who I am now." In Charleston, the aftermath rippled for years. The Faith Harbor Church closed permanently. The building stood abandoned, its wooden pews collecting dust, its cross leaning slightly to one side after a storm. Some said the church was cursed. Others said it was simply hollow, like the man who once filled it. Rachel's parents founded the Rachel Bennett Foundation, dedicated to promoting emotional honesty and counseling for couples in faith-based communities. They spoke at churches, schools, and conferences about how silence and shame can destroy even the most faithful hearts. Her best friend, Mariah Lewis, became a teacher-turned-advocate, appearing on podcasts and documentaries. Rachel believed love could redeem anyone, she said in one interview. But love without truth isn't love, it's a mask. The case became a cautionary tale taught in seminary ethics courses, The Fall of Reverend Pierce. Professors dissected his psychology, a man undone not by lust, greed, or wrath, but by the sin of pretense. Malcolm avoided the general population as much as possible. He worked in a laundry room, folded uniforms, and swept chapel floors. Chaplain Miles Henderson, a soft-spoken man in his 60s, was one of the few who spoke to him regularly. He later described Malcolm as a man in prison long before the cell. When I first met him, Henderson said, he told me he didn't deserve forgiveness. I told him none of us do. That's why it's called grace. Malcolm's response was chillingly calm. Grace can't bring back the dead. Over the months, Henderson noticed changes. The once confident preacher now avoided mirrors. He began fasting obsessively, believing that suffering could atone for sin. When other inmates mocked him, he never retaliated. He's already punishing himself, one guard said. You can see it in the way he walks, like he's carrying her ghost on his back. He kept a small notebook in his cell. In it were fragments, confessions, prayers, and unfinished letters to Rachel that would never be sent. One read, "If I had told you the truth, maybe you would have pitied me. Maybe you would have left, but you'd still be alive. I would take pity over blood any day." Another, "They think I killed you because I was angry. But it wasn't anger. It was fear, the oldest, ugliest kind. The fear of being seen." 2 years into his sentence, he received an unexpected visitor, Patricia Bennett, Rachel's mother. Guards were stunned. When she walked into the visitation room, Malcolm couldn't meet her eyes. He whispered, "You shouldn't have come." Patricia sat across from him, calm but trembling. "I didn't come for you," she said softly. "I came for me." For a long time, they said nothing. Then she took out a folded photograph. Rachel as a child, missing a front tooth, grinning with ice cream on her chin. This was her first day of school, Patricia said. She was nervous, but she smiled anyway. "You took that smile from her." Malcolm's hand shook. "I know." Patricia's voice softened. "I thought I hated you, but hate keeps her trapped. So I came here to tell you, I forgive you, but you'll never have peace until you forgive yourself." Tears rolled down his face, silent and unending. He tried to speak, but couldn't. Patricia stood and walked out, leaving him with the photograph and a silence heavier than any sermon he'd ever preached. Time wore him down. His health declined, his body frail from fasting and age. In his last months, he became a fixture in the prison chapel, not as a preacher, but as a janitor who scrubbed the floors after others prayed. He once told the chaplain, "It feels right, cleaning up after better men." One morning, he didn't show up for work detail. Guards found him in his cell, slumped over his Bible, eyes closed, the photograph of Rachel still tucked inside. He had died in his sleep, cause of death, heart failure. On the last page of his notebook, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "I wanted to be holy so badly I forgot how to be human." The prison chaplain arranged a simple burial in the small cemetery behind Willow Creek. No visitors came, no mourners, no family. Only a wooden cross with his name burned into it. Malcolm Pierce, 1984 to 2024. But a week later, the warden found something strange. The Rachel Bennett Foundation had quietly paid for a new headstone. It read, "Here lies a man who learned too late that truth is the only path to grace." Charleston eventually forgot the scandal, as small towns always do. But every now and then, tourists passing by the abandoned Faith Harbor Church swear they hear faint echoes from inside, a man's voice reciting scripture. No one knows if it's imagination, wind, or something else. All they know is that the door to the old sanctuary remains locked, the pulpit untouched, and behind it, dust-covered, lies an open Bible, forever turned to the verse he never lived by. "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." John 8 verse 32.